Hi, it's Rob. This video covers the latest update on the GDS editor tool, bringing the tool up to version 1.5 and includes some major new additions. To load the tool, we can launch it from the navbar on the website. Once the app's loaded, you'll see an intro screen with a bit of blurb about what's new and a start button. So I'm going to start with a new blank scene. And let's take a look at the changes. So there's been some small changes to the interface. As there's new ways to import components, you'll see the add component area has changed. The scene tools have moved up to the header, so we can access scene settings and the scene hotkeys from the header. As well as that, you'll notice there are two new buttons in the project workspace. So now this is version 1.5. It recognizes your Game Developer Studio account. So if you're logged in on Game Developer Studio, you'll be logged in on GDS Editor. You don't have to be logged in at all. It doesn't really offer much being logged in at the moment. You can log in on the site and then refresh here if you're not logged in and you need to log in. The first change we're going to look at are the changes to the transform dialog. I'm going to import an asset. This banana will do. And as you'll see, there are two new buttons on the component inspector. In version 1.4, the component inspector contained a properties button which held the transform data as well as actions on the component. In version 1.5, I've separated these into two different dialogues. So the action dialog will contain all the actions that you can execute on a component: duplicate, copy to clipboard, add slice data, and clone, as well as the component opacity and its blend mode. Also in this dialog, there's a new addition called the information. So if we want to find out information about the component, we can see a bit of information here about the type of component, its component name, etc. We can also add our own description, my banana version 1, and this description will be added to the data. These keywords, we'll take a look at this in a moment, but these keywords will be important for a new feature that we'll look at shortly. So closing that, let's take a look at the new transform dialog. The transform dialog simply holds the data about the component transform. You'll notice that this transform dialog also has some new additions as well as some new improvements. So the first new addition is the fact that we can skew components on both axes. I haven't had a chance to do a skew tool yet, but I shall work on a skew tool so we can skew components from the canvas. As well as skewing components, there's also a batch resize. So if we select multiple components and we want to make sure they resize all to the same scale, we can batch resize from the transform dialog like so. As well as batch resizing, you can resize by pixels, which will resize the transform area or the selected area. So if we want to make sure that our selected area is 30 pixels wide, we can do so like so. But you have to select the lock aspect first. And this will be 30 pixels wide now. Okay, so those are the new additions to the transform and action dialogues. Another new feature on version 1.5 is the color replace feature for GDS art components. I'm going to import an art component. Let's import this apple. And we're going to use the new color replace feature to swap out the green. So if we open the color sliders for the GDS art components, you'll see that we already have color groups on this, but if we didn't, we can always use the color replace function. So if you look down at the bottom of the dialog, you'll see the color replace. What we're going to do is we're going to pick the color that we want to replace and pick the color that we want to replace it with. So let's go ahead, and in this example we'll try and change the color of this stem. So let's pick this brown. As you can see, it's selected the brown, and let's replace it with purple. So let's select the color we want to replace it with, and let's just pick this color. Now we're going to use a swap mode, and with swap mode selected, we're going to drag the threshold slider to target our color. Swap mode will directly replace your selected color, or any colors that fall within the threshold, with the replacement color. So if we drag this out, you can see that if we drag our threshold, you can see that it directly replaces with the color. Shift mode, instead of directly replacing the color, will replace the color but maintain the tone. So for example, if we select our apple, let's select green of the apple. So we want to select this green, and we want to change it with blue. Let's try that with swap mode so we can see what happens. Can you see how it directly replaces the color? If we change that to shift, instead of directly replacing the color, it will calculate a new color and maintain the tone and saturation. So as you can see, we can make our apple blue but keep the tone, so we can keep the distinguishing features. Now that we've applied our color replace, if we apply another filter to this component, it'll reset the color replace filter. For example, if we decide to apply contrast, you can see how it's reset and then applied contrast. In order to avoid this, we can bake the color replace filter here. And now that it's baked, once we apply our other filters, you'll see that it doesn't actually change back. It doesn't revert it back to the original color. So any filter that you apply, with the exception of hue and saturation, must be baked if you want to apply another filter without it reverting back to its original color. If you don't like what you've done, you can re-establish colors and start over again. Now, the reason that you have to bake it is because when you apply filters, changes to the luminance and the contrast and saturation add up quickly over time, and you'll see that as you slide the sliders, it turns into a big mess. So one filter can only be applied at a time, and if you want to preserve that filter, you must bake it. Another addition to the color change are the bitmap filters. So if we go ahead and open the bitmap filters, you can see that we can now apply hue filters to GDS art components. GDS art components, remember, are simply SVG components with additional attributes. In the previous version, you couldn't apply a hue filter to an SVG component because it already had a hue filter, but I've decided to add the hue shift. But you have to be careful that if you apply a hue shift on an SVG component via the image filter effects, and you apply a hue shift via the master color controls in the SVG slider dialog, you're not going to get the desired result. So just be aware and remove all your filters to see the effect of the filter. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the new library features for GDS Editor. If we go back and look at GDS Editor 1.4, you'll see that the library on 1.4 was pretty pathetic. This library was originally a placeholder for what I wanted to do with libraries on GDS Editor. Let's go back to GDS Editor 1.5 and have a look at the new libraries. So back in GDS Editor 1.5, as you can see, we've got 3 new library buttons. So let's take a look at the first library. The first library is a library of free assets that you'll be able to download and install directly into the editor. And the second library is a library for those that have been supporting me on Patreon and on the site of the GDS Editor Essentials assets that you can also install directly into your projects. So the idea of the library is, as you develop your project scene or your game scenes, you'll be able to directly include assets that you can add to your existing components. As time goes on, I intend to be adding to both these libraries, and any new free assets that come up on the site you'll be able to find in the free library, as well as new assets for Patreons and supporters. To import an asset, you simply open the library and click import. So let's try that, and there you have the asset directly imported into your scene. And these are GDS Editor art components, so you'll be able to control all the functions like any GDS Editor art component. If you're working on a scene and you find that you've already got a lot of assets in the scene, you can select the import into scene button into a new scene, and GDS Editor will import the assets and pop them into a brand new scene for you. As you can see, it loaded the scene, so we've got our original scene. Let's quickly make a text component so we can visualize better. Let's bring in another component. As you can see, it's dropped it onto a new scene. So if you don't want to pollute the scene that you're working on, you can just drop your components into your scenes and import the assets that you want. So it's unlikely that you'll want all the assets, so it's best to keep them organized in scenes and simply copy and paste them into the scenes. The same rule applies to the supporter library as well as the free library. The library has a simple search function, so you can search for assets. If you need to bring in icons or ribbons, each asset will have its own tag similar to what's on the site now. The next new feature that we're going to look at for the editor is something called the inventory feature. The inventory feature is similar to the library feature from before, except that this will be your own library that you can build by importing assets from the site or importing assets from your disk or wherever you keep your assets. So you'll notice that in the top bar there's two new buttons. That one of those buttons is the inventory manager, and in the add component area you can access the inventory manager. So if we access the inventory manager to add it in, you'll see that there's nothing in there at the moment. This is a blank start. So if you're starting with GDS 1.5, this is the scene you can expect to see. So it says this is your inventory. You haven't added any assets to your personal inventory. So let's go ahead and add some assets to our personal inventory. You can access from here, or you can access from here. I'm going to close this a second and let's access from here. So this is your personal inventory management dialog, and as you'll see, you can import inventory assets from your local disk or from assets on the scene. So I'm going to import an asset from local disk. Let's have a look. Let's import all these fruits like so, and as you can see, GDS Editor scanned your uploads and has prepared thumbnails of each asset. So here you can see it's the file name is in the name box, and there are keywords and search times that you can personally apply to your assets to index them. So for this one, I'm going to apply globally some keywords. So these are all fruits, We'll apply fruit, their food, and ingredients. So every time I want to file or find an asset with these keywords, I can search my own personal inventory and they'll all come up. As you can see, they've been applied globally. And now I'm going to go ahead and commit these to my personal inventory. So confirm and add to inventory. And these have been scanned and added to your inventory. So let's close the mat and let's go and open the add from inventory button. And as you can see, all our assets are now in the inventory and we can click to import them into the scene. Let's go ahead and look at some other ways to add to the inventory. Let's open the inventory management. Here we're going to go to local and I'm going to navigate to GDS editor file. Let's take a look at the bathroom environment that I recently uploaded to the site. So inside this download you'll see there's a GDS editor file, and I'm going to get this GDS editor file and I'm going to open the GDS editor scene file. And as you'll see, it scans the GDS editor file and it will extract all the assets in that file. And this one had keywords already appended, so we don't have to do anything. We'll take a quick scroll down to see if there's any errors, anything missing. And nope, that all imported properly. Let's go and confirm and add to inventory. And it's now added those assets to our inventory. Open our inventory access and let's search for some fruits, what we previously added. Let's type in fruit and now let's search for sponge. That was in the bathroom kit. Sponge, soap, not soup, soap from the bathroom kit, and we can search bathroom as that was on the entire upload. And as you can see, you can go ahead and build your own inventory. I've tested this inventory with about 6,000 assets in and everything seemed to work fine, including the fast search update. Let's try adding a couple more assets and then we'll move on to looking at the selector. So let's go back up to the management, import assets into your inventory. So let's import some assets. Let's look for another big pack. Let's check out the platform essentials. All pieces, let's import those. And we don't need the text. As you can see, it's imported everything. Let's give it some keywords. So you can give this the keywords that you feel you're going to use when you search. So maybe make a keyword for platformer. Maybe you could give it a keyword for a perspective. Depending on how you want to organize your own library, you can give it those keywords. And let's confirm and add those to the inventory. And that was added. Let's check that we can search. And this updates pretty quick. And there you go. Everything's been added to your scene. Let's close that. Now we're going to take a look at adding components from the scene selection. So let's go ahead and import this wood pack. There we go. Let's select all of those and let's stash them away in our inventory. So let's go up to the inventory. So instead of loading a scene or loading a file, let's select that. That's selected, and as you can see, it's brought everything from the scene into our inventory. So let's go ahead and give it some keywords. wood, that'll do. And let's add them to the inventory, and we can delete these from the scene now. So every time we need wood, we can just search wood. There you go, and click the ones that you want to add to your inventory, and they're brought into the scene, and you're free to manipulate them as you would any other asset in GDS editor. So you can use this function to build your own game stash for whenever you're working on a project. So if you've already downloaded a lot of assets from GDS editor, you can from GDS website, you can index them all in your own scene. As well as that, you can add scenes, entire scenes to your inventory. So let's say we've built something in our editor. Lay those out. Let's select those. Let's go up to our inventory manager, and we're going to untick this. We don't want to import them as separate components, so let's untick that, and let's bring in selected, and let's give it my fruit scene. We'll give it a keyword so we can search later, maybe the scene keyword. Again, you'll have to organize this for yourself, and let's add it to our inventory, and let's check our inventory. We'll delete the last search term, and there you go. Let's tick this to import it as a new scene, and let's bring it in, and there you go. There's our original scene. So it's not just scenes. If you've made a nice title for yourself, let's make a title. Let's set a nice So this is the font that you're going to use in your games. We can save this, and let's give it a name, my usual font, and let's stash that in the inventory. So when we come back to our inventory, you can see there's a GDS text. So if we load that, it brings it out the inventory into the scene for us, and then we're free to edit this as you please. So the separate components also applies to scenes that you bring in. You can bring it in as a scene, or if you check the components, you can split it into the scene components. Okay, let's take a look at managing your inventory. So let's open the inventory. If you want to remove something from the inventory, you can do so by clicking the remove. If you want to edit something in the inventory, like the name, or the keywords, you can do so through the edit. As of 1.5, there's no batch or bulk editing, so you'll have to do this one by one, I'm afraid. However, what we can do is delete the entire inventory. If you want to delete the inventory, it'll ask for confirmation. Whoops. There we go. And now it's dropped everything in the inventory. Now you've got nothing in the inventory. If you need to make a backup of your inventory, you can dump your inventory onto a scene bit by bit and save it as a GDS file. and then re-import it. Okay, so as well as that, there are some minor bug fixes and some other little changes to the UI. For example, I've moved the grid dialog over to the top bar, so if you want a grid you can turn the grid on from there. And a couple of other small changes, but that's mostly it. I hope you enjoy those new features. Stay tuned for new updates. Thanks for watching. Bye.